this is like, we'll see like the database entry from this terminal. We have a client running on port number 3001. We have like OAuth server running on port 3000. And then we have the Restify server. This server actually serves the protected API. So whenever a request is made for the API, it will check the token, whether the token is valid. And then it will like, if it's valid, then it will give back the response. And on the database, we have like information for different user and what tokens were granted. So right now I just sent a request, like client sent a request like some user wants to authenticate and it received a login request. I want to authenticate. So it sent a response which said like, do you want to authenticate user using Driven API? So he gets a URL back, like, do you want to request using Driven? Once I click that, the 3000 port is actually the OAuth server. The server port is like 3000. So server receives like, server received a redirect, like client redirected the user with all and filled all these details like response type, redirect URL, and so now when server receives it, it will check whether the user is authenticated or not. Server checked it like that user is not authenticated. So he first told him to like authenticate himself. Who are you? I don't know you. So right now the server is asking the user to give his username and password. So we have a like a dummy user Bob. So once the user is authenticated, so we can see the URL, like what was the response type, redirect URL, everything. What is the client ID, like ABC123? That is the client ID. So user gets like a pop-up link. Do you want to allow driven computing? How it came to know about driven computing is from the client ID. So it will have checked back in the database like who is this client, and it came to know that this is driven computing. So it gave a option like, do you want to allow driven computing to access your account? So once it was the access was granted, the server redirected the client back. And like the server redirected the client back with the authorization code, and the client used that authorization code like to get back the token from the authorization server. And we can see here like a request was made at the Restify server, which has like a protected API. And using that API, client made a request and it got the details of this particular user using the token. Along with like giving back the token to the client, it also gives a refresh token. Like there will be like expiry date attached to each token. So whenever a token expires, he can use like the refresh token to get back a new token.
That code you just showed us, was that the output that the server gave back, or the input that went to the server?
You mean to say Restify server?
Yes.
This one? This is the output, right? Oh, sorry.
That's okay. You
So
don't need
this
to
is
go
the
back.
output that the server gave back.
So the output actually included the user's password?
I mean, I signed it normally. I mean, the query was like, give me user information.
Okay.
So now it depends on whatever API was there. If he doesn't want to give any information, it's like just based on like API, what is the API. I mean, it was stupid of me to include the password in the user information. I mean, in the whole transaction, password won't be sent to anyone. Like just when the all server authenticates the client, then only he will give his password.
Okay.
I mean, third party never get to see the password. This is the token. after OAuth, like we did some research on like how to do password management, like how to keep them encrypted. For that, like we came up with like 3 options, like at what level we want to do encryption. Whether we want to do application at the application layer, like within the code we have a key and then we encrypt and then save it in the database. So the advantage with doing that application layer is that like even if somebody has access to database, they don't see the clear text. The data is always encrypted in the database, and only those clients which are like authenticated, only they get to see the real username and password. Second option is to like do encryption at the disk or the file level. Like whatever we run a driver on top of the file system, so whatever goes to the file system is first encrypted and then saved. So everything is like on the file system, whether it's like database file or other source code or whatever is there will be encrypted. But the problem with that approach is like if anybody has like access to the operating system, he can like get access to the data. Third option is like there are like a few technologies like Oracle has brought like transparent database encryption, wherein like Oracle database itself will like encrypt the data, and it will have a key management vault, like where you can store the key, and so whenever data is saved in the database, it will use that particular key and then encrypt the data. Advantage of using that method is like we can have like more granular control over the data. Like if I want to like encrypt column wise, I can do that with Oracle. Recently, like there is a company called.
Oh,
That's 1 hour fast.
It's not falling daylight.
Recently, a company called Portico, they have like come up with a split key encryption technique where they use like homomorphic encryption. In homomorphic encryption, like, suppose I have like 2 numbers in clear text, 2 and 3, I get the output 5. Now suppose I encrypt them, 2 and 5. Like without decrypting, if I add them, I should get 5. So without even decrypting, you get, when you put those values in the function, you get the same output. You never have to decrypt them. That's how like homomorphic encryption. So they came up with like split key encryption, whether you have a part of the key and that part of the key will be stored in the cloud. The problem with all these approaches is you have to like trust the cloud provider, because your key will always be there on the cloud. And like the other constraint are like the PCI, it won't be compliance to other like financial institution or like European Union or like other privacy laws. But with what the law says, like you should be the only owner of the key. The key won't be at the mercy of the cloud provider. With this type of encryption, you actually own the key and you run an appliance. So when you insert the key, like it's like spread within the cloud only has a part of the key. That's how like the split key encryption works. But right, we checked it, like it's really like costly. Like they charge like per hour, on per hour basis.
So apart from that, we even discussed architecture for the cryptography that can be done without depending on someone else. So how we split the task was that me and Varun will independently come up with a password management scheme, and then the next iteration both of us will attack each other's scheme to find flaws. So those were his output, and these were 2 architectures I suggested. So the first one is similar to what the Mint app does to store user credentials of their bank accounts. What it does is you can have as many number of keys with different people on smart cards, which is hardware. So for your this may be one with Dave and one with Liz. Only when both of them come together and swipe their cards individually, a hash is created with the concatenated keys, which is used as an activation key. This activation key can be used, only this activation key can be used to activate the encryption key, which is common for all users. So, but this encrypting key, since it's common for all users, needs to be a secure system which is tamper-proof. This requires hardware-based security. If anyone tries to access this encryption key without having the activation key, this encrypting key is destroyed, and hence all user credentials are now useless. This requires hardware-based support, which makes it expensive, but it's really secure. Even if there's a attack which happens, you do not lose, you do not leak any user credentials. All you do is you lose all your user data, which they can add later, which is their card, user IDs and passwords, but you don't lose it to anyone. Another method, which is a little less expensive but almost equally secure, is you use the user's password to generate a key only for that particular user. So if I enter my password like test123, it goes through the PBKDF, which is a key generation, a password-based key generation function. It creates a key for you, and that key is used to encrypt only that user's credential. So there will be a separate encrypting key for each user. But the problem here is if a user forgets his password, even we don't know what his encryption key is. So if he forgets a password and needs to reset his password, he loses his credentials. So that might reduce the usability a bit. That was one reason Mint did not decide to use this and decided to use this, because they believed people had a lot of bank accounts and you don't want them to keep adding all of those again when you lose a password. So these are two separate architectures, and there is another way to just combine them and make something hybrid. Like if you really like the idea of having multiple keys with multiple stakeholders rather than one person to prevent an insider attack, you can have that happen in between, where you store user passwords and credentials in a database which is encrypted using a hash of multiple keys. Or you could even apply tamper-proof systems to user credentials, but since it's a very expensive hardware, you don't want to apply it to a very big database. So yeah, that's for the presentation. If you have any questions for any of that.
So, at least 3 times in the early part of the presentation, you mentioned how you went from, I believe, 2-week iterations to 1-week iterations and improved your productivity. Is that correct? So I'd like to try and understand. I'm not doubting it. I just want to try and understand why that was the case.
Every week we had something. We had to demo something to the client. So during the 1 week, we had in mind that okay, we have to show something. We just can't say that okay, we didn't complete. So we had that in mind, and then we actually put in work. And when there was 2 weeks, we'd have been like, okay, no, we still have 1 more week, and we wouldn't have done it. So during 1 week, we actually got a lot done.
Okay, I'm still not quite clear.
So when we had 2-week iterations, it wasn't the only reason for increased productivity. One thing was we did not have very clear objectives at that point. That was one reason, and that didn't lead to very good planning and estimations. For 2 weeks, we did not know what we could actually do in a span of 2 weeks, because there were times we would finish something in the first week and won't know what to do for the next week, or there were times when we know that we don't have to demo anything the coming Monday, but we have time till the next Monday.
Okay, so in Introduction to Software Engineering, you were supposed to have a weekly planning meeting and a weekly reflection meeting.
Yeah.
So it sounds like when you were doing the 2-week iteration, that was not happening.
So we did meet on every Monday, but the planning for the whole iteration wouldn't happen for on every Monday. That would happen only when the iteration ended.
All right, but my point is that when you went to the 1-week iteration, you forced yourself to have the more frequent feedback. And the feedback was the key, because the feedback helped you do the next planning cycle. Not
only for what we'll be working on, but because of the retrospective, a lot of changes were even made in the process, how we did things, like moving from daily stand-ups to 3 stand-ups a week to 1 stand-up a week, or an optional stand-up. Even those things in a way affected how we worked or how productive we were, so having the retrospective every week also was really helpful.
Okay.
I have a question. I think one of the goals of your project was to be able to support additional car vendors. So in summary, where are you now in terms of that goal?
So we have the Hyundai reversed and we have it documented. So it's now just integrating it into, so we didn't have a Hyundai to test on, so we've just documented it, and whenever there's a car available, it can be easily integrated with the Driven platform since it's documented. Nissan, we had access to a car, so we've made a standalone client which can anytime we just add it to the Driven code and it's ready to work. We started work on the Ford but did not have enough time with the car to actually, so we captured a few packets, got a few things, but not enough time to test it and actually work with it because we had the car for a week. So, but yeah, and we've also, since we knew reverse engineering and capturing packets from first, we even did like helping out Dave to set up his phone for capturing packets in the future. So if they get access to new cars later, he can also do the reversing part of it.
So what would your recommendation be for the next team, if there was one?
So there is still scope of a lot more manufacturers being added because each manufacturer we've faced has had a different implementation of the same function. So I'm sure new cars will have new ways they're implementing it. So it's not just what APIs they have, but it's also how they're authenticating a user. Like Nissan, they had a session cookie, they had a NOT token, and they had an app ID. Someone else has a session cookie and something else. So you need to figure out how they're actually authenticating a user and how are they letting you access data and how is the response coming. So you need to make changes according to those. So that would be one major part that can be done. Even we are still having a bit of trouble implementing the OAuth on the mobile because there hasn't been much support. Like even for companies like Facebook and Twitter, their OAuth for mobile works because they have a secondary Facebook or Twitter client which they trust on the mobile device. Else even they can't be completely secure. So there can be some tweak around it to make it more secure.
So Varun, I have a question for you. Since we know the author of OAuth, what would you recommend for him to change in the spec? Or do you think it's just more testing? Since he's coming over here again soon.
Is he really?
What do you think? What's your feedback for him?
I guess it's going fine. Like I've been through the documentation, and I find it's like very comprehensive and exhaustive. All the details are there, like how it works. Like,
But what about OAuth for mobile?
They need to do something for mobile.
Yeah, with mobile the problem is like it's not the problem with the OAuth. It's the problem like inherent with like mobile application. Like they cannot keep a client secret. So it becomes difficult to involve a third party.
What if you were able to put the authentication on the SIM card? Would that help? You know, on the hardware.
And then our third-party apps won't have access to it. Only system apps will have access to it.
So how would you solve that problem?
So like I said, like is the problem
What do you think?
Yeah, go.
So like I have like different mobiles. Like anybody who installs that application has the access to like a reverse engineer it and get the client secret. So it can't be solved. Like you cannot like identify the client on the mobile app because anybody can copy that secret and start like acting as some other client. Like
Even if the credentials are stored on the SIM?
Even if it's stored on the same, like you will have to give access to it to application. So if I have a mobile, I have this application installed, I can like go through and debug it, like what is the actual client secret for Facebook or like for Twitter.
So one discussion we had was like if they had this mechanism implemented for OAuth, what we were doing for reversing wouldn't have worked. Like those companies, if they knew how to secure it on their devices, we wouldn't have been able to capture the packets and reverse engineer their APIs. So in a way it was good for us that there's no way to do it on mobile. And that was the only reason, but it was again a con that we couldn't use it on our own platform.
Yeah, that's why like OAuth has like different types of grants, like one is like suitable for web application or the other for mobile app.
Okay, so I have a mobile app question for you too. You mentioned how it was smooth using the different tools. What would you have done differently?
For what?
What would you have done differently now that you've had this experience using those tools to make the mobile app?
I mean, since I'm more proficient with Android, I would actually prefer building a native app, because with PhoneGap, so many things weren't supported. Like we couldn't, load 2 functions at once, and so because of that, we had to add like refresh button to load the image. So we had all those problems. I suggest like going for native app than PhoneGap. I mean, we wanted something quick and fast for the practicum. So I think in that case, it makes sense to use PhoneGap, and when you don't have enough resources, it makes sense to use PhoneGap. But otherwise, when you actually want to have everything working well and efficient and have it fast, I think going for native is much better.
Okay, thank you very much, team. Let's get a team photo.